Hi, welcome to Chapter 6, the Duel for North America, 1608 to 1763. We're covering the first section here today, France and Canada, and to all the way to Washington starts the war. So we're going to talk primarily about the clash between the French and the English, the British at this point, excuse me, which helps lead to the French and Indian War, and there's other conflicts, but really what ultimately leads to is the American Revolution. We are on the path towards the Americans rebelling and breaking away from Britain. So the French. Oui, oui, monsieur. I never took French. My mom did, so maybe, I don't know. But in the late 1600s and early 1700s, you have kind of the big four. You have Spain, England, and then later Great Britain because of the combination of the kingdoms. And France, the big three, sorry, that's why I don't teach math, fought over territory in North America. There were the four big wars. There was King William's War, Queen Anne's War, King George's War, and then the French and Indian War. And they're basically continual conflicts between these countries for control of North America, for the land, for waterways, for forts, for fur trade, you name it. Prestige, worldwide prestige, not prestige worldwide. I'm not going stepbrothers on that. In 1598, the Edict of Nantes granted limited religious freedom to the French Protestants or Huguenots and stopped the infighting civil wars of France. And because of that, France was able to explore outward, much like the English were embroiled in their whole issue with Henry VIII in the 1500s, and they were worried about wives and heirs and all that, and they didn't really explore out until after Queen Elizabeth I took over. And then you have a little bit of an interruption with the English Civil War in the mid 17th century. Same thing with France. And this is why Spain was so dominant in the New World until the 1600s, because France and England had their own issues. From 1643 to 1715, you have Louis XIV, the Sun King, the longest reigning French monarch in history, pictured here. Uh, Ruled over a fabulous, fabulous empire, built the Palace at Versailles, which was the epitome of luxury and wealth and power. But he also, on his lavish spending and wars, helped bankrupt France, which eventually leads to the French Revolution and people chopping off heads and Napoleon. But that's world history. France established the colony of Quebec in 1608. 1608. Samuel de Champlain was the father of New France. He's really the guy that kind of sets things up. He's the explorer of this region. Now, the French are markedly different to the Native Americans than the Spanish or the English. They were friendly with the Huron Indians. They were generally friendly with most Native Americans. They worked closely with them. The exception was the Iroquois. The Iroquois recognized the British had better trade. They were more powerful, and so they always allied with the British. And so that's the only tribe that didn't really ally with. The government of New France, or which would eventually become Canada, was under direct control of the king under Louis XIV, the Sun King, with really no elements of democracy at all. So you can't see a lot of lineage of what became Canada or even the United States, but that's just kind of what's going on here. By 1750, there's only 60,000 people living in New France or Canada at the time, so it's not widely settled like America. America, at the eve of revolution, has 4 million people because Americans were prolific in the bedroom and had lots and lots of babies. So, whereas the Spanish came for gold, glory, and God, and the British came for religious freedom and trade and tobacco and gold, the French came for fashion. They came here for beaver pelts. Beaver pelt hats were all the rage, and the French, they explored for fashion. Which says a lot about France, I guess. I'm not sure. You have the coulées de bois. I don't speak French. I have no idea how it's pronounced. You can make comments on how bad my French is. I'm deeply sorry. I'm not. They trapped and explored, naming places. We get a lot of French names here in America because of the exploration that they did. Capital of Iowa is Des Moines. The capital of Louisiana, which Louisiana is a French name, is Baton Rouge, which means red stick in French. I do know that. You have the voyageurs who recruited Indians or natives into the fur business, but disease and alcohol ravaged the natives, much like natives all across the New World. Disease really took a toll on them, and then the evils of fire, water, of alcohol really kind of poisoned the mind and hurt Native Americans. You have the rise of French Catholic missionaries, notably the Jesuits, who tried to convert the Indians to Christianity and save them from the fur trappers. Fur trappers like to get a little crazy, I guess, and drink too much. They weren't, I guess, the Spanish perspective of convert or we'll starve you off the land. They weren't tied to the encomienda system. They were a little more open-minded, and they just say, hey, you hear about this guy named Jesus? He's pretty cool. Kind of that kind of perspective. Antoine Cadillac, you might have heard of his car, actually it's just named after him, founded Detroit in 1701 to block English advances. It's so cold in the D. Robert de La Salle explored the Mississippi and the Gulf Basin, naming it Louisiana after his king Louis. And the French founded New Orleans, or if you're from the South, Nolens, in 1718 to block Spanish influence. They had encroaching powers all around them, so they founded a lot of these things. If you go to New Orleans, I haven't been there, but I'm told there's a lot of French influence. Creole is kind of a mixture of some French languages. You have the fleur de lis, which is the symbol of a lot of things in Louisiana. Actually, the New Orleans Saints on their helmets had the fleur de lis on the side of it, which is a French symbol. And then Illinois became France's garden empire of North America because much grain was produced there. And like I said, the French, fashion. We will have beautiful hats. Here's a picture here. It kind of shows the green is the French, and they controlled most of Canada. And then all the way, basically from the Rocky Mountains to the Appalachians, the entire Missouri, Mississippi, and Ohio River basins, all the way down to the port of New Orleans. The Spanish controlled the American Southwest, Mexico, Florida, the Caribbean, South America, and then you have the British there, where the original 13 colonies were. Robert de La Salle, even though he explored, he was murdered in Texas there. Don't mess with Texas. Here's the Native Americans in Quebec. This is by Jean-Baptiste Louis Franquin. Doing some fur trading right there. Some more trading with the Native Americans and the missionaries between the French, kind of showing the influence that, these cultures coming together. And then here's just kind of the pocking of French trading posts across America and Canada, which is everything on the red dots. You have the Hudson Bay Company up there around Hudson Bay, where he actually died. The Montreal-based fur trade in the green, the Northwest Company, and then Spain and New Mexico. So the French, fashion. Keep that in mind. So the clash of empires. You have King William's War from 1689 to 1697. You have Queen Anne's War from 1702 to 1713. Pitted French and British colonists against each other. Americans, even though we see ourselves as being different here, saw themselves as British. And one thing they despised was the French. That was their rival, like the Yankees and the Red Sox, or the Broncos and the Raiders, or whatever, Alabama and Auburn for you college football fans. Roll Tide. Both sides recruited natives and used guerrilla tactics. They didn't have regular armies, so they're doing hit and run. They're hiding behind trees. They're not fighting the proper gentleman's way of war, but using natives on their side. And so this is kind of the continual thing. These are skirmishes in the backwoods, but there's a lot of violence going on. The Treaty of Utrecht, I hope I said that right, or Utrecht, in 1713 gave Britain Nova Scotia, which in Latin kind of means New Scotland, actually, Newfoundland, and the Hudson Bay. And so France was losing its hold on Canada. Then you have the War of Jenkins' Ear, which was fought in 1739, British versus the Spanish. Kind of a bizarre thing. It was fought in the Caribbean and Georgia. I believe a dude got his ear cut off. Can't remember. Let me look that up for you. Robert Jenkins encountered the Spanish revenue authorities, had one ear sliced off by a sword, and the Spanish commander reportedly sneered, "Carry this home to the king, your master, whom if he were present, I would serve in like fashion." So they sent an ear to the king, and the king said, "Oh, no, you don't. You don't send me an ear. Can you hear that? Can you hear that, Spain? We're coming to get you." Which merged into a larger conflict in Europe with the Austrian War of Succession to form, not from there, bad typo, King George's War in America, as France and Spain allied again, these two Catholic countries fighting together. And this is just, you have a continual war going on. And a lot of times it starts in America and spills over into Europe, and other times it starts in Europe and spills over into America. And then I hit the wrong button because I'm not very smart. The colonists captured Louisbourg, and in 1748 they gave it back to the French. So there's this continual just trying to take away land from each other, back and forth rivalry. Here's the some of the Louisbourg was captured up here in 1745. You have French raiding towns in upstate New York, in Deerfield, and that one there, Schenectady, never been there. You have British gains in 1713. You have British gains in all these places, but eventually they gave some of it back from treaties. Kind of some other things going on. You can kind of see New Spain. You see some of the French here, the territories that were gained in these wars. And then you have the clash of the Jenkins Ear War down here in Georgia going on. So later English monarchs, you have William III, who ruled because of the Glorious Revolution, oversaw the collapse of the Dominion of New England. He also fought King William's War. Queen Anne from 1702 to 1714. They had Queen Anne's War, which lasted pretty much her entire reign. George the first Hanover king who actually spoke fluent German. He's German. Don't tell the English that. Had signed the navigation laws. Or they were laxly enforced, which we call salutatory neglect. King George II. Georgia was founded. You have King George's War, and then the 7 Years' War, which is really critical to us. And then the hated and loathed King George I, which we know because of American history. So here's some of the British gains. You can see that they got the up there and the Canadian Shield around the Hudson Bay and all that good stuff. So in steps a young colonel from Virginia named George Washington. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this guy before. Turns out he's kind of a big deal, but he actually starts a world war. George Washington was from a pretty wealthy, well-off family in Virginia. Most of his brothers and actually most of the males in his family died at a young age, and so he's not even the oldest of his brothers, but because of death and disease and things like that, he ends up being the heir. He has his first slave was given to him as a teenager. He traveled to the Caribbean. He contracted smallpox at one point, and he wants to make a name for himself. But because he was born in America, the British looked down upon him. American-born people were never as good as those born back in Britain. They couldn't attain a level as high in the army or the navy or any of the armed forces as a British-born person. So Virginians claimed 500,000 acres in what is now Ohio. They were land speculators. Washington, his entire life, was strapped for cash. Even though he's wealthy, he has a lot of land. In the South, they invest their money in land and slaves. So they don't have a lot of commodities or capital or cash. They can't throw out the old Johnny Manziel, dollar sign, Johnny idiot face, whatever you want to call him. And so he has a lot of land there that if settlement is opened up for Americans, he could really sell it and make a profit. But the French are building forts there. So this young colonel was sent by the British. He's 22 years old to Ohio to tell the French to get out. You're trespassing on this territory. That's his orders. Just go to Ohio, tell the French, which is actually in Pennsylvania at this time, get out. You're trespassing. Those are his orders. The message did no good. So he went back to build a fort at the fork of the Allegheny and the Monongahela Rivers, which is called Fort Necessity. The Allegheny and the Monongahela Rivers form the Ohio River, which is sometimes called Three Rivers, which is modern-day Pittsburgh. Many had claims to these land, including Washington and the governor there, the royally appointed Governor Dinwiddie. Sorry, guy wasn't blessed with a good name. And the French were already building Fort Duquesne nearby. Remember, his orders were just tell the French, get out, get out. Instead, he starts building a fort. The French are also building a fort here in Pittsburgh. This is a young portrait of Washington. He was, 6'2", very strong, stout man, brilliant horseman. He was a good dancer, and apparently he liked to put his hand in his shirt. Never found out what that's for. Maybe they're doing gang signs. I don't know, West Side or something underneath their shirt there. So Washington established Fort Necessity in the spring of 1754, and then attacked a scouting party, against orders at the Battle of Jumonville Glen. The French retaliated with a substantial force. The Battle of Jumonville Glen, some of the people that were attacked there were actually diplomats, and they had diplomatic immunity, and they weren't supposed to be attacked. And so the French retaliated. They captured Washington, and he could have been put to death for this, but they released him. On July 4th, ironically, July 4th, 1754, he traveled back to Virginia, published an account of this, and he got a name for himself that this guy just acted. He took the gumption and went out and did something himself. This is a picture of where this battle happened here at Jumonville Glen. Washington wasn't really aware of what was going on based on some of his biographies I've read. The natives went a little crazy and actually chopped off the guy's head. It was vicious. It was bloody. Washington was almost like, oh, oops. And then, the French retaliate and capture him. He returns to Virginia, publishes accounts of his exploits, and he becomes well known for attacking first. And he's actually famous in Britain for this. Even though he didn't really follow the orders, they liked that this guy had a little bit of initiative and attacked the French, put the French in their place, even though he got captured and there was a guy's head that got chopped off. But Washington was a go-getter. In 1755, as a retaliation, the British in Nova Scotia uprooted 4,000 Acadians to prevent retaliation for this, and they sent them to Louisiana. Eventually, what's going to happen is they're going to send a much larger force to remove the French, and an all-out battle takes place. When word gets back to Britain about this, the battle goes bad for Britain, by the way. It basically leads to a world war. The 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, even though it's not called World War I or World War II, was indeed a world war. And we'll continue that on our next section. So George Washington, not following orders, starting global wars, making a name for himself, mainly because he needed to make some money. So if you have any questions, put them in the comments or just comment, and hope you enjoyed this. Here's a little bit, kind of the 9 world wars. We're going to start with that next time. So thank you.